mani padme hum, mani padme hum, mani padme hum, mani padme hum, mani padme hum.
Sergio Lumbo da ora di vega, Shachi Jagu, Shala, Chan, Se, Jimmy was a doji, Jingo, the Jim, Jin Chuji. Many only Jangu, Jan, Se, Omi Chuji, Young Jago, the Sanjay, Da Georgia don't change it in the yellow Raja Wagon, so Wagon J. Dagi J. Don Bottom G. The Dagi. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
That's a Chetan, the two Chivi Nekalat, but Nana Sanji Jumdende, Tamboka, Tambo Dembahi, Chunkors, and the Tambo takers now. Not Hebercha, so what? Kinute, a kitchen boy, but Tigana Yeke, Benatabo Chuyi Kanana, Luchus over changing or something like that. Kindu, the cargo is. Titonda the cartoon is, you know. So, that Sudan see me now. Today, Devan do what Devan don't okay, semi what today, Dungar Mendoa, or Dungar Tea, Dungar Tundu, Dungar Mevaswea, semi what I think is.
So when it comes to Dharma practice, first the Buddha taught the four noble truths with the first turning of the wheel. And the first of the four noble truths is you should understand the truth of suffering, or there is, you should understand that there is suffering. And so this is very important, to really understand this noble truth. Likewise, in the four dharmas of Gampopa, first he says, may my mind go to the Dharma. So it says, grant your blessings that my mind may turn toward the Dharma, or go toward the Dharma. But in any case, the first one is that the mind is turned toward the Dharma, or going toward the Dharma. So what does this mean? So in the context of these two, then we understand that all beings are afflicted by suffering. And all beings want to be happy, and they have the mind that is always seeking that happiness. And likewise, all beings want to be free from suffering, and they are always have this mind that is trying to push suffering away, or trying to diminish suffering. This is how all beings are constantly sort of motivated by these two.
What the Kota Tangi, Kungatudunga Hibacha, Yabosamoji Tambina, Tineji, Zo Karsina, that Sanjay Kisonga Jibu Mari, Karsangazo, Kansa, Susu Mune, Jiksamo Tambina, Tinazo. Teorda Teleda Carsegore. To the Chardon, Retina da Tiro. Not so Latinita, cheap. Dobaji job go your or Tin Doba doyachi, Yore, Tine, Chitan Doba de Mai Bajigla, Kota Mayuya, what a Tindi Jason. Gulonwa, Gunting to Rajik, Yorwa, and not to Dobaji, Dob go Yore, Tigana Yike, not to Mandua Jigla, Chikas of Bongo, or that Tilly can send the swing your is.
So you should understand the truth of suffering, or that there is suffering. And so the Buddha, this is what the Buddha spoke, this is what the Buddha said. And then when we look at our own experience and examine the experience of others, we see that each and every individual, no matter who it is always sort of in a state of kind of pulling near and pushing away, or attachment, essentially attachment and aversion. And so we have our desires, we have these sort of agendas, that we have, this desire that is based on kind of some hope for getting something that is going to be fulfilling, or some form of happiness. And so we think, I need to accomplish this, or it needs to kind of turn out this a certain way. And if it doesn't turn out that way, or if there's some sort of possibility that it may turn out that way, then may not turn out that way, then there's this sort of resistance to that. So we don't want things to turn out one way, but we want them to turn out another way. And so when, likewise, when things that we don't want to be a certain way occur, then we're really busy trying to get rid of that, or to push that away. And this is something that really everyone is going through or experiencing. This is this state of the mind of all beings, no matter who they are.
That that tea corner that dungy juicy Zawando Chadi, Tindu didn't much of that Doba, Reva Yuba Telayang, Wando, Tinetic, Dongan Jumbre, Sambata Carsana, Tindini Gay. Gala Umbigala, Shokchimbu Yudu, Tineta, Shokchiran road, change it in Matoji, Bena, Charan, Seatin, Leon Yorwa, Corredot, Garnatin, Shokcher, Charan, Seati, Ledu, Matudungi, Senareta, Ganiti, Ungu. Yes, the thing as to have Karko Persona, Mato Tamala, you are Hako, Samsung, that's one can you do, Karsana, these. Some no tango or sena, Katango Lavina, or Tanaji would do me usually end of what some we are Penachana, get out the circumstances, Mandayori, Na go Kona de Penachashavina, Pensono di Shubina, Michi, Jigla Peshashada, maybe not Nati, not Pesha Mare, not Chigure doji, not to me or but Pesha doji, some we are. In a tea, Copesha Union to me, or good Savat can be conjured. Chorla, Redor Yorwa. Redor and the Chama Yubicabla, who should see a can you mention you? Yes, to some of them, telling us what a Nachibu, something in Davin, Nachibuchi to me or doji. Some grava, Tamare, or Casinati, nature, Rangi, Tamala young day. Chichaps young beji, Tiniki, Chaps, Chichaps, Corres, Sama chapter 1, Tomato Vacati, Kaza Jigo Latini, Tachitako, neck up that is Machipachanda Yomarwa, Yina Yanko, 지금 삼모 당초 강한 땅 곳에나 오타 가지고 능이거래 어디 삼모들 알아요. 예스.
We have everyone experiences the affliction of some form of suffering or another, and that's that the form that suffering takes is constantly in flux, so it's always in a state of transformation and change. There is always the hope and fear. So we hope to for things to go a certain way. We hope to accomplish certain things. We hope to get certain things. We hope to have pleasure, pleasant and pleasurable experiences. This is a very strong sort of constant drive, is always sort of between hope and fear, or pulling towards and then pushing away, trying to establish some sort of comfort or some sort of sense of well-being. The stronger the hope and fear, the stronger the attachment and aversion, then the stronger the suffering. The more sort of acceptance, the more we release the hope and fear, the more we release the attachment and aversion, then there is peace. There is less struggle. There is less strife. And everybody, it's very important to understand that everyone is in the same boat, that everyone really is experiencing the same thing. So we're not alone. Everyone is afflicted in this way. And so sometimes when there is suffering, or when suffering, one's suffering becomes very sort of strong, one thinks, oh, I'm the only one. I am suffering. I have, this hardship or this difficulty, and my situation is different. My circumstances are different, and so there's this focus on being kind of the only one or all alone in one's strife or suffering. So, for instance, if somebody is suffering due to financial difficulties, if they don't have, their financial needs are not being met, or they don't have any money, and then they think, oh, I don't have any money and I'm the only one and everybody else has money. But actually, that is never the case, because even the people who have money, even those who aren't experiencing the same type of suffering, are still caught in the throes of hope and fear. Or another way to translate redol, which is hope and fear, is also expectation and doubt. And so everyone has this. Everyone is the same in this experience. So it's important not to become sort of isolated in one's own experience of suffering, to recognize, to broaden the view, so that we are also conscious and aware of the struggle that others, that all beings are experiencing. And this is just nature. At the same time, also, this is just the natural condition. There is suffering. There's the truth of suffering. It is pervasive. So it is never limited to one individual being.
Oda tiga na yang kan hisam grawa o lama konso pe ni kan yu maris konso pe karsa ta pe kadui me karsa ta peace wa happy jiwo jang jang do ji ingiris samgu tang hisam girwa ina kizi teya maris. And now for myself, chekina ma yore karsa do dan cha sha ina is called responsibility my or what in the jing mazo redo te hu chen bu hu yo da jing ji de chu shuo yi de ben de jia xiao yin de chu zuo de什么当兵的chu zuo de tong guo ya ke re wa hu ji yo de wa wa da ti yang ye de ne ji ti yang ma tong ni ti ha ka le de na challenge ma mo yo ro no ni tu ti te wa da ti ni ji ni ko redo ma mo yo de ga na yi ke ji mo ne ta ne 양고 학파트게 짓다 라미 멘시나리 짓다 개개 멘시나리 티니지 요비나 particularly 노티 짓다 추지 개개한테라 responsibility 에 항상 요리 티니 따뜻한 지텐디 게고 티처로 개개 있는 거다 단다단다 티야 게고 subject 가리나 딱딱으로 티샤오이나 되게 요러 봐 이내야 지 Tatatina to give this. In a be hard better. Land over you that me. Marant, you know, the water. In a parjo committed monetane, Sechiman, Pantoya, or Tindicus, some shit up on the subject of Hatikan do. In a spiritual Garianda Ojina, would tell you how I wa. Monetane, that responsibility, Karsena. 심지에 파트식 유들라 고지 메카비양 대신 정도야 다시 제가 탈토이양 선제 공부토도야 타기니 링겐도 고지오쇼요레스 김리제 인도 호텔 콘큐바나 이리 집단 고제로데 효침보요레 에스티네 세너리 강해요레스 와 강해요 같은데 마티스.
And so sometimes we might think, oh, okay, well, there are some who aren't really afflicted by this suffering, like, for instance, the lamas or spiritual teachers. They're always, probably always in a state of happiness and just complete peace. But actually, that is not the case at all. And Drupal Rinpoche says for himself, actually, maybe sometimes there's even greater hope and fear or expectation and doubt because there's so much responsibility. So for instance, in building the retreat center, then there's extreme hope there. There's a lot of hope placed in being able to successfully bring about this place for practice and study. And throughout the process, there are many challenges. And so there are a lot of hopes, expectations, and doubts, or hope and fear, especially for lamas or spiritual teachers, because they hold the name, of a lama, a spiritual teacher. And so there's this extra responsibility there. So it's not, and in particular, when one is a teacher of Dharma, this is different from, being an ordinary teacher. An ordinary teacher has also a great deal of responsibility, but they can sort of keep their responsibility to this subject, limited to the subject that they need to teach. So if they teach the subject well, and then that is kind of enough. But for a spiritual teacher, there's so much behind just the content. There is the importance of really holding pure motivation, the hope and expectation to really be of benefit, to actually benefit people in this life, that there may be benefit, and that also that there may be long-term benefit, future benefit. And so actually the sort of stress or responsibility for spiritual teachers is very immense. It can be quite intense, and so with the hope, of course, is that that their actions are beneficial, that they are creating benefit for both a temporary, creating, helping others to achieve happiness in this life temporarily, and also creating the causes or the seeds that for, future benefit and happiness. And yet there is no kind of guarantee. There's so much that is involved with regard to causes and conditions. And so for that reason, then there really can be very strong hope and fear or expectation and doubt.
我在今年从大的看修有所以呢，个些几他们空虚啊，那一的。我几部的什么样的，我觉得他我了东年两个都身边去，过落地，开始的啊，他马的，天天马的过落地，就那儿的，看啥说的所有的那样，啊，经济肯定那里有的过，就概念就用不了的，是真的。这还可以呢，现在就过概念这边那个了，过就让人把它，啊，把它就开始引起这种嘛是 normal 的，我觉得哇。 뭐 드니지 처리나 드니 고통이 되더니 지 가서 그래 지 간에 요비나 드니 간에 되게 더 못하고 말이스 더마도 베고다 나냥게도 나 지부리샤 다 삼바이나 드니 지 간에 되 쇼체르 와 간에 되더니 핸들 간에 되게 동len치야라 드니 간에 용구요레스 티인도 드니 지단 지간디나나 라임바 수도 수임이나 고 as long as we are chadang di yubi shula, tene ko kanye ji yongu yore. Ti indu ji kanye tibi ne kala wata ti ko ji jetang normal da wore, rang yi re, tega na yi ke ko dunge se ya te yang, ji dunge shebar cha su dunge te yang ko ji takbe ke rang yi, tembe ke rang yi, njurwa mewa, jucho tang ya mewa, tindiki mari ko dikita ngazo na hingsi ba senari do chamala ko geje ki jono yorwa tene dungin jo ya me ba mari ngazo ben zo karsna deva thang dunga ninja nyake semde nyangdo wa yine ya semde ya boji samno tante semde geje yorro wa oda ti ngazo ji ya 그 dunye tangi kongsi ba dunye yoda yore yeti yene yang dunye korang yakbo dawina korang imarawa wada tirele oji kitwala tini nga tsu ji ndo tobi ina tini nga tsu dunga gangi yowa te kis je hender chitu gres
So to think, that we're the only ones who are suffering, or when experiencing sort of the friction of suffering, to think, kind of to be isolated in our own experience, is really kind of mistaken, because really all beings are afflicted by suffering. This is the natural. This is the nature of the truth of suffering, and so as long as there is attachment and aversion, then there is dissatisfaction and suffering. This is completely normal. This is nature, and so therefore there are always difficulties. There's always some degree of struggle, and so. If we latch on to this struggle, thinking that is a problem and we need to get rid of it, and sort of lament the fact that, oh, why me? Woe is me. I am suffering. I'm the only one who is suffering. Then the suffering intensifies. arise. Instead, when there is a broader perspective and we recognize the suffering as nature, then, and when we understand that all beings are experiencing the same thing, there is acceptance of the suffering, and so therefore the suffering is less painful. That because the greater the attachment and aversion, then the more painful the suffering, the more of the suffering actually becomes a problem. And so when we just accept that this is the truth of suffering, this is normal, and we don't, on top of the suffering, we don't create more suffering by trying to get rid of or resist, then it is easier to bear. It is just a part of life. And also to understand that there is no permanence in suffering, even to the slightest degree, because moment by moment, things are changing. The state of our mind is changing moment by moment. There's really nothing that can be frozen in time. And so there's no permanence to our difficulties. There's no permanence to our suffering, because moment by moment, there is transformation and change. And so, the one who experiences both happiness and suffering is the mind. And the mind itself is not some sort of fixed experience. It changes moment by moment. And so there is nothing to grasp. There is nothing to hold on to there. If we look directly at the nature of suffering, we see that it doesn't really exist, that there is nothing substantial there. And so that also really helps to be able to handle, to just be able to bear.
How to handle that depending on what he could do not Dungari some assembly vina, could do not show children royata, and you consume yere, could do not money, send number to Baji, a gun and rovina, then go to me, Tigana, you do me, Himaro, Tinijism Corvina, Tinikoji, Natsuji, to me, Uvina, Karsakati situation. You don't need you in a Kansa Koran Canola, young, Tindy to me, Meva, or the Chag, or that you do, that the Chatham is.
So everyone, in brief, everyone experiences the truth of suffering, and how to handle it depends on what we, sort of the attitude that we hold in regards to it within the mind. And if the greater sort of the narrower the view, and the greater the sort of desire to get rid of suffering, then the greater the suffering can become. And so it really is also so dictated by our concepts. So whatever the concepts that we hold in the mind create so much of our experience. So recognizing the lack of inherent nature, the lack of real truth to the concepts that arise in the mind is hugely important. And so if we are able to recognize that, then already we have greatly diminished our suffering. And as that ability to release concepts, recognizing them as not really being substantial in nature, of not really having any real truth to them, then the more we overcome suffering, and eventually then there really is not the experience of suffering. One is no longer bound.
That in 37 there was 37 day non katan da peche mena the kashiji or da kas peche mena amla chirwa se peche tanga ju yu do ji sta kanda kan yin mena peche da trinity sari hiba de segnyam ba lam de chirwa
So now we are on verse number 37 of the 30. Are we? No, good. Of the 37 Bodhisattva practices. And we have been discussing the methods, these verses that have, the preceding verses up to this point, and also this verse is really dealing with how to bring really challenging or adverse circumstances onto the path. And so this one in particular is bringing sort of negative speech, like negative words that we hear or that others say to us onto the path.
Roman du sunga ke tsam de hin singe mana ya le giri yen du hiji kuba do ba yes.
So it says, even if in the midst of a public gathering one exposes faults and speaks ill of one, humbly paying homage to and perceiving that person as a spiritual friend is the Bodhisattva's practice. And this is an alternate translation. Even if some dig out my hidden faults and insult me in the midst of a crowd, to bow respectfully, perceiving them as spiritual friends, is the Bodhisattva's practice.
That deal Kalaburi said that Gashi, and that's a Tom Jew or Mungashi Tenio. That Koraji Mukoraniam the no Rodina, Tinikoji. Choposenari Yaboyorwa. In a Yatiniji, Mombo, Dunetinici, get up a Carcelota, get your Mupala, Sola, get your mobile of the Tinici, Korakona Bay Carcelota. Energy into the party cheap so that I don't know Tibet Mondo Labro, Mondo Senatic, this Koran, the Catado, the charge it in Egypt, Machimba Latin, John Caliona. That John Lavia or that Chuchi chamber star, chewing a man Yamaki Lagosta, Momo Hako Marwa, Tini Hamahodu, and sometimes I that in town, Yamanga to Nikahi Chumbre. WeChat group. Tidingahe Chombika Latini, WeChat Lati Carzinati. The Tipan of Redo, public gathering in a Cochi, Yam the Your Maritina Yang, Cotina Latini, with just in Yan doing the Tiniji. Get at this toast mass no lap, Tiniji. Chunga Magi chairs, Chuji chairs, that is on the Kantaya. Tindi go Chungu or is on the Fetching the Chopola Chungu, Chachola. The bling on the younger coaching men. Conaniam the donut, Yabo, European Yachi, Momo, don't become at the meeting. The younger is on
that. So sometimes it can happen, right? That sometimes, especially in a group setting, in a situation where there are a lot of people, that somebody may sort of say something cutting or something kind of rude or that feels harsh or sort of pointing out our faults to others in a way that sort of stings. So even sometimes those that we feel closest to. So when we're surrounded by our good friends, then or we're kind of going together here and there, and maybe it's just one or two people or so, and
that time's not sort of nice each other.
And at that time there's sort of like loving regard and they're nice to one another, and there's kind of this feeling of I want to say in Spanish amistad, right? Like sort of, yeah, is that right? Is that the right word? Yeah. But there's kind of like a feeling of of closeness and sort of like equal sort of respect. But then sometimes when there's a group, then something this like causes the energy to rise. And so sometimes even among trusted friends, then somebody might kind of like say something in front of everyone, like something kind of strange, like, oh, you have this or that fault, or remember when you did that, or something like that. So Dhruvanla said, on their WeChat, they have these big WeChat groups, and sometimes they're like, over 100 people in the WeChat groups, and even though, like some of them might be better friends than others, but sometimes there's kind of, this sparring that happens, where somebody will just sort of say something to kind of cut someone down, or say, oh, when you remember when you did this or that, or sort of point out something that happened in the past, or criticize some sort of fault. And so this is something that happens, and surely, it definitely happens, he says, in the East, and probably this happens in the West too. It's just kind of human nature, something that happens.
What that can be young grace on that in the Chitanga to that that and the Jersilon Corona, in the Sombere, in the Chungu, in that Chitanga to Yamlanchi, Nikala, Nini Yung Budua, Carsena, Chingola, some Tanguay Jagan, or wrong one, some Tanguay Chadi, wrong one, some Tayatella, or that the Yaporin, those somebody, like Yankee, Market, Tindiki, Mama. So there were Tindiki Gala, Tigram, Parchindo, Rampage, exciting no chini, Hank Jones, Jug Zamba, Junjo at Yapomare Zamba, Tiniji, some Angle, Tini Hanky money.
And so really, with regard to this tendency, it's important to practice or exercise, this practice of the Bodhisattva in situations like this. So both from one's own, like from the perspective of oneself, and also with regard to others. So from one's own side, for instance, the way that we can think is that, if we have a tendency to kind of call others out, or sort of, say sort of mean or hurtful things in public to embarrass someone, or to sort of like, somehow, make, in regard to like the attention of others and so forth, then it's important that we think, I am not going to say such things. I'm not going to let sort of the excitement of kind of the group mentality, or the energy of the group, affect me in such a way that I will feel the need to sort of expose the faults of others, or to somehow like, disparage someone else in front of others. So that's from one's own side, we can practice, not doing those kinds of things.
That Gejong Kichu is on a Sanji, Gejong, the Tanga, Gejong said that practitioner lab the doing not jump, Domba Hu, Lendi Hako, Sanji, Lata, Tepa Sanji Stone, follow the Sanji Stone, Chingantella, Gejong's Labra, Gewaching. The castle was the Gejong Chu is on a Chu is Chu the Tombo de Carsena. Choyang Larman was on the Shimbaji Conrolandi Yuna. He can't keep around the Conrolani. Tini, Chiayo. Yes, on it. Tini, Shayang started singing Yamba, Duja at the Chim. Tini, Chiguyona, Solaguyona, Tini, Tartini Chiayo. Yes. Tini young, Tantula large sum, Tant to the bay, to John, Chunima Chamber. Looking for every negative side, okay, to the chamber, chun the chamber, Tinichayuna, 되게 고텐다고 지까지 좀 파치아요. 예송. 어다 타마야 되네. 지금 동구요나 와. 되네. 파 동야요 말이스. 어다데 대당부터 주님의 지하게 고반하고지. 냠내 지리 되지. 지고. 예스.
So then, from when one is on the receiving end, so as one practices one's own actions in such a way that is, that one is being kind and being careful not to be hurtful or harmful to others. And then when it comes to being the recipient of others' sort of hurtful or not so kind words, even when exposing your hidden faults in a public gathering or something like this, then we really apply the practice. So we think, I'm somebody who is dedicated to Dharma practice. I have received the vows. I'm a holder of whatever levels of vows. I understand karmic interdependence, or the truth of cause and effect. And I understand the Buddhist teachings. I have, really deeply listened, taken in, or listened to and reflected upon the Buddhist teachings. So therefore, I must apply the Buddhist teachings by making sure to, in such challenging circumstances, to make sure that I go in the direction of virtue, that I respond in a way that is virtuous or wholesome. And so that means, for instance, if somebody becomes angry with us and treats us in a way that is harmful or hurtful, if they're angry towards us, then we don't become angry and respond in kind, or like we don't return anger with anger. And so there's a sort of this practice of non-retaliation. So if somebody says negative words about us or negative words to us, then we don't need to, respond with negative words in return. We don't have to then turn around and say negative things about that person, to others. If somebody is always sort of only seeing the negative in us, they're always only pointing out our faults and seeing, what is wrong with our behavior and such, then also to then not become one who is, always looking at the negative in return, when in regard to this other person. So we practice it's really like non-retaliation. We don't have to return sort of negativity for negativity. And so this is a practice of a certain form of restraint. So we're actually applying the vows of restraint in these situations. If somebody, even if it goes so far as somebody becomes physically violent, if somebody actually is hits us, then we don't return, that we don't become violent in return. Rebe.
네, 다시 다들 개종 추시 상지 좀 되는 냠내다. 근데 해 송요리 에스티는 다 있었더니 지고 와.
개종지.
개종 추시에서. 다 개종 추시에 들어와. 줄랍사 요와 되네. 초나 방초야 요 말에서 공부하나. 근데 해 양들 예세는 되게 다 저거 그래서는 배. 책주부 예시 당법 배. 녹자 텐데 배 하우스 보는 텐데지나 파트리 제아요 말에서. 네, 창주소나 창주에서 하고서 창주에서는 되게 당이라 임바 저랑 배. looking for negative 처럼 배 두번데 지송 예지송 매지송세야 들어와. 근데 담아대 대죠. 라르메데 익스야.
So these are the four trainings of restraint for a practitioner of virtue or a Dharma practitioner. So the four are practicing restraint with regard to anger, so not returning anger with anger, practicing restraint with regard to harsh or hurtful words, so not returning harsh or hurtful words with hurtful words, and practicing restraint with regard to I don't know exactly how to translate this term in Tibetan, but Drupal said it's actually like what he was describing is looking for the negative. So we don't return sort of that negative view or the mind of looking for the negative in us. We don't respond by looking for the negative or focusing on the negative in others. And then fourth is not returning violence with violence, or like actually if somebody actually is physically violent, we practice restraint with regard to physical violence.
Tindu tangi konchuba nagi rangi ke ngaso meje ke ngaso tsinye mal lavyake ko katovyake yomari no matter your power or lot of money or that yine ya meje ke chorang take tan itani la machowa katovya yomari yine ya ko rango ne kargorsa semke echi ngone somno yabo ji tambina ji ngone no matter kandeji take do bola guyo na rawa 세계고 작자다 그러와. 이는 같은 것만 쉬인다디 직진의 보성고 초유남이나 이는 아주 interesting 휴요래. 즉 단다 네게티브 들락할수는 파죠 그 네게티브 그 성예와 누구 땅에 다단 내만으로 이나 가서다 맞아 남치야 요르와 그 로로 남치야 요래 되네 뭐다 책면에 발람도 쳐야 요래 되네 더월람다 다노 요래 다 칸다 칸이네면 아지 등에 되냐 뭐지 연구 요래 얘는 등에 되냐디 당공시와 나이래 맞아 까투고 말이 얘네야 depending 맞아 라레버리 맞아 벌써 등에 되냐다 라레 말이 yes 근데 가장 네 뭐라 텐드 베네차 샤비나 단다 칭년이다 칭년와 칭년디 미지기 칭년 랍송나 다 초랑 라레버리 칭년의 칭년 차메차 알아와 칭년바디 계시 초랑 게메 힘바지에게 칭년바디 랍송나 초랑 그 리라이스와 오, 그 작통 타게 책 동바로 책이 그냥 강야 류양 노트 말에 생양 노트 강야 노 말와 근데 그러지 뭐 작자 아코는 오지 삼배 로요나 그 노마다 가실라는가 강야 노 말나 등이요 말와 그 강야 거 말이스 기능이 라인에 depend accept how to accept 다한테 많이 받고 다 단계리 단다 개종 출신 파 opposite 어다 코책 누구 등리지라서 다네 다 콜이야 선택 컨로지 라면 당원의 등에 용도도 와 어떤지 다 개탄데 있고 증여를 이나다 네 나는 가서 10 로그로 10 페이지 different user이 간다 칸이면은
10 different 그래?
람트 치러 와라 람트 치러 와 등에 람트 치러 와 미니엠 발람트 치러와 근데 단 담으라 여러와 가장 공골 도사로와 가히 계기 손나더니 어디다 들어서는
So So whether or not the harsh speech or the hurtful speech of others causes us suffering or not, really, when it comes down to it, it really depends on how we handle it in our own mind, how the state of our own mind. And so if somebody says, harmful words, then, actually there's nothing we can do to prevent that. We can't, they can say whatever they say, there's full potential there for them to say whatever speech, comes up. People say all sorts of things. And there's no way to sort of control the speech of others. And so there's nothing that we can really do about it from our side. But if we really think about it, no matter how bad the words are that have been spoken, that they have said, then they're just empty words. They're just like an echo. And so there's really no harm that the words can really do. And so it's really up to us, how to handle that kind of opportunity, really, to bring something that's really challenging, to bring the negative onto the path. In this case, in regard to negative words or hurtful words. And so there are the others, and this is the same thing that has been coming up also in these preceding verses with regard to, the actions of enemies or harm doers. And this advice on how to, bring those challenging situations where others have been, that maybe, the phenomena of sort of, an enemies, doing harm, then, instead of trying to kind of control others or to respond with retaliation, to instead use such opportunities as a way to really deepen our practice by bringing them onto the path. And so when we hear unkind words that others have said, or others say unkind things to us, or they point out our hidden faults in a public gathering, as is explained here, then to not immediately respond with grasping, but to just hold that in the recognition of the empty essence of speech, to really practice hearing words to be like empty echoes, to really, it's just empty sound. And there is therefore no harm. There's nothing there that can really harm. And so no matter how much is, no matter what is said, whether or not it inflicts suffering upon us is really actually up to us. It depends on us. If we can just accept it as empty echoes, then there's no suffering there. But if we sort of do the opposite of these four kind of practices of restraint, for the virtuous, the Dharma practitioner who practices virtue, then if we respond in kind with retaliation of some sort or another, then it's really only going to magnify the suffering. It's only going to cause the suffering to increase. So again, there are 10 verses here that are really dealing with these challenging situations where there's harm from outer enemies, and the way to bring those kinds of situations onto the path.
Tiene tirana que ta nga zo ka tong kong shu yi ke ta nga zo chu nyam le ji bi ne ka la tang ki kong shu na yi ji dung yi xie ba cha su ke ta dung yi se ya ta ji Kanye say, Tio Walatani, Jingato, Dumeki, Tariaki, Tabio, Tabchiori. Tirana Yiki Sonde, what to cross at you Walatani, Sanji to Tombo cross at maybe not to Tabua, Sanji as humor. Or the thing do Tirana Yiki, not so cheap. Charge the content and you come to an idea of the time of progressive to need you doing it charge here did you doing mago one so you know doing mando one in a practical level the particular or some tambina Chico Kanye Kasi you Tetsam JK call training the turtle grace. Tindi Bena Chashavina, not to such a Shimbaji Labgona, Bena Benzondo Shubina, not to the East Coast, West Coast Logona, Tine Chik Teleon, Kanya Mamboji or Langal, Traffic use Naki Tansa Yori, Tosa Yori, Manda Juji or Kanya Mamboji. In a Kanye Chik was on it. Young Tilkupai, not a fair destination, tiny and over. Oh, then a Tonjaki Pastina was a tiny and over. There's a pen Tomboji, Lantomboji Javina, hiding not a destination, tiny and over. Indeed, not a Kanye Tindiji, you were teletani, telling us to send Tom and Yamlanchi. Or Yamlanchi, that a lamp chair to tell it. Lamp chair, soon do. Or Tindu. Lamna Cheriati, Karcher Gorsona, Tanda, or Magic Dupotansona, Tamba Lela Yomaro. Magic Tsig, Duboji, Tadunya, Jana Bay, Carsegore. Nepa Mishing, Mishimbaji, Nimbaji Lavin, Ning a Trezo by my Zondoa, Tegla, Sonja Yomaritina, make Yankma, Tumbutombo, yes. What at Naiji, Unguyor, the Tambo. Yena could teach challenge. Yamlet Chinera, some Mambo, or some of Pamela Mambo, Kandistan person, some of Inji Jera. Sometimes Inji took Menoma, Yan some of Shimbaji Pani, or Tagi Conchu, take Tomba, not Cardo, take Tomba, 10 days of Motam. But that genetic tap number not Chini, Tamati, not pasture, because pasture lavina. Imagine. Take the book Kasi Labina. You know, I'm a channel. In a Noya Meva Charati Tandama Chayoma. Kunyamna Chico. What in the Jitan Jikan Leka and Tiliwa, Jikan Leka Tambonga to Leka Jirawa Tigaro, some machine there, Yoma. Mistake Momochi, Kale Momo Ja. Kinichi, Tamata professional channel. What I can do. Same na itigana tambo challenge mo chikene kanye mombo ji donlen chine tambo mo de ji dungi yule chartoista tini ne kaso dungi se ya de ko dugo mare is galesia dugo mare sta dungi de la tu maro challenge la.
So actually, as practitioners on the path, these opportunities or these situations where that are really a potential for causing a lot of grief or suffering, these challenges or difficulties, such as all of these that have been mentioned, which ordinarily could become a source of great, becoming really distraught, becoming really upset, becoming really, angry or really experiencing suffering. they actually become opportunities for liberation, because this is the nature of samsara. Samsara is full of conflict and strife and difficulty and suffering. But if there were no samsara, there would be no way to become enlightened. There would be no opportunity for liberation. So it's in dependence upon these challenging or difficult circumstances that we have the potential for awakening. And so first, if there were no samsara to begin with, then there would be no Buddhahood, or no, yeah. So on the one hand, the suffering of samsara is pervasive. And we don't want, there's this constant sort of struggle against suffering. Beings don't want to experience suffering. But on the other hand, as a Dharma practitioner, when we are confronted by these difficult circumstances, or these situations that cause us to suffer, then actually it becomes like a really practical opportunity to receive some training. That if we take this opportunity as training, then there's real there's real outcome. Well, we can really see the outcome of that when we do in fact bring such situations onto the path, in this way of really applying our Dharma practice. So for instance, it's like when you're traveling, if you're going to some place, like say you're traveling from the East Coast to the West Coast, then, it's a long drive and there might be like a lot of traffic here and there. You might encounter some bad weather, but each time you have, some sort of obstacle that comes up, and then you overcome that obstacle, you're that much closer to your destination. So you pass a high mountain, you cross over a high mountain pass, and then you're that much closer to your destination. And so it's the same when we take all of these opportunities that life gives us and we actually bring them onto the path of practice, that we don't really see them as negative, but we see them as opportunities for growth. And so, of course, it's not easy, especially in the beginning. And and especially when it comes to, like for instance, this verse that's discussing, hurtful words. So if somebody says something hurtful, it can really feel like a knife to the heart. As is said, words are not weapons, but they can cut. So they can cut the heart. And so. So when such a situation occurs, to apply whatever method is most useful in the moment. So maybe maybe there's the feeling, the pain or the sting of the hurtful word, receiving it. And then there's an opportunity there. So if we can have compassion for the person who has said the harmful thing, then this is actually also really very effective. So if we can develop compassion in that moment, then that's a very powerful practice. If we cannot develop compassion, if we can take a moment to recognize the empty essence of the words, to really practice seeing the words as empty echoes. So you can take all of the different methods that we have available to us and apply whatever method is most successful or whatever method is most effective in that moment. And then if we're able to really respond to the situation in a way that is in accord with the Dharma practice in some form or another, then we've really sort of like passed over, we've passed beyond a certain obstacle and we're that much closer to our destination. So really, no matter how many words, negative words are said to us or about us, really they cannot harm us. Whether or not they harm us is kind of up to us and how we receive them. And so it's the same way with, for instance, worldly activities. If there's some sort of skill, worldly skill, that we want to become proficient at first it's not so easy. You know, we make a lot of mistakes. You know, there are a lot of errors that we might make. We don't always get it right. We're sort of clumsy. We stumble here and there. But the more that we do it, eventually, actually, we become professionals. We really become skilled in that thing. And so it's exactly the same way with Dharma practice. We can't expect that we're going to be able to, you know, respond perfectly. It will end up, you know, it's a process. You know, we may be unskillful many times, but the more that we try to apply the practice, then eventually we will become more skillful. And so there are so many methods available to us. And all of these methods are meant to help us bring these challenging circumstances onto the path of our Dharma practice. And essentially, you know, to not regard these challenging circumstances as negative, to actually see them as opportunities, to actually embrace them as Dharma practice is really key.
Okay. Do it. So is there questions? So if not, so we can keep going.
Yeah, there's a couple questions.
Okay.
There's one from Yasna, and she asked, how do we practice non-retaliation and restraint with defiant teenagers, for example, when they're being disrespectful and expressing anger?
요 충성 투소라.
Ere kongso garsi penadi amala gubagayang mena, teni yang kongso kontrol langiona, teni de chuje de to yang nyamlen chega ki tapshi yaksho garayore gayan sena kongso dukja chena teni gayang mache na tapshi yaksho yorebe.
이 다치탄디 데려와. 지 다 단다 되는 거데 내종 추이해서야 돼. 기타는 거 무스 누구 땅 용에. 배나 파마다블라고요 말에. 보기다블라고요 말에. 다 기타지 고무 침보 텐디게 고도 보트네 땅 위요나. 아직 맞출 스트렝스 텐디게 고그레스 라고요와. 이내양 다 부기 강라 지 콜로 충용 투소라 다 초직디도 고직 스마트 노래티나 초현지디도 공소계 선호당하 차창하지 땅토기가 말와 텐디지 이내양 다 조갈세나 지 고탑히데 다 밤에 그 불을 제와 요래 제와 요와티 시종게 토네 지 제와 똥 투야하기 때문에 지 탑히 제야 돼 당보 인사래 스타키 당보 삼상 가서 대요래지 샤제 칼라 담니에 미지리 마 제와 효치 뭐지 요래티네요 맞아 리액션 되지 비스 공론도 오지 사 티치야요 말에 주도보레 너 티니지 라부요와 티니지 인도 티니 이나 제와 효치라는 라부요 티네요 고진가 저 무스 라렌틀라 tene tische conversare nambana uji temina atin tisiang chamre ko kami kha yore yina yang te ta 100% marwa.
So yeah, when it comes to these 4 ways of kind of practicing non-retaliation, actually I think the literal translation is the 4 virtuous trainings, right? The 4 dharmas of virtuous training. But in any case, this is not necessarily so applicable in the context of like parents and children and the need to, of course, like discipline your children. It's really when you're talking about like 2 kind of full full-grown adults like
Mhm.
me, Jimbo, you know, who like, you know, they have strength, and we need to practice a certain amount of like inner strength to restrain in those situations where we otherwise might be really triggered. Now, in the case of children, you know, so sometimes they can be quite smart and maybe manipulative. He didn't say exactly that word, but I think maybe that's what he meant. So we have to kind of think about, you know, what is going to be the most effective way to respond to certain situations where, you know, they're really going to get the message. And of course, you know, in this situation, the parents have a great love for their children. And it's important, of course, to show your children that you care, that you love them, and they know that. But sometimes it's not actually the most skillful thing to respond in a really loving way. So sometimes there needs to be, you know, some discipline. So actually, in the case of, you know, children misbehaving, sometimes the parents actually, because their love is so great, it's actually out of a really strong love for them and the wish for their well-being, that sometimes parents have to sort of manifest in wrathful forms, so that it's not, even though there is love there, the expression is not necessarily a loving expression. It's actually, you know, one of sort of, you know, putting some limits, you know, or really exercising, you know, some sort of, you know, or some trying to discipline them. So it may actually be like a wrathful expression, but actually it is motivated by love, and that is actually completely fine, because it is really based on the desire to help the child, to benefit your child. Then 100% yo mare karela. So he said I sort of didn't quite get it right. So
That's okay.
maybe you can say and they try in English. Yeah.
Tindigiri ina ta ko tarhi yorwa.
Mhm.
Ina ta te chorang yet the jail la ya tam go la ya chorang te pujete go nor ni satati.
Oh, okay.
Ta ti kipare tini ta chamre nga to te chi grace.
Mhm.
Ya nga to tseva yores.
Mhm.
Tseva yore ti ina ya nga to pa nga to reaction te tis chi tsu bonda wo la grwa.
Mhm.
Ina tindi maimba. Tseva yuwa na yiki chi pe chambo. Nyembo tini la go grace. Ya tini chi ne pen grace.
Oh, samsamna.
Mhm.
Mhm. So sometimes it is actually effective to respond in a really gentle, caring, and loving way. So if, for instance, instead of responding with you know, sort of harsh words, to speak gently and calmly in a loving way, and to not say negative things. Bebe.
Right. So yes. So we have, yes, of course we care the children. So sometimes we really took care to our children, but then just reaction we counter like not really gentle way, so we can counter harsh word, you know. So then the children make excuse, you know. So oh yes, oh I'm a mother, I don't like me, or whatever, parents don't like me. So
if we don't, yeah.
harder. But here is mainly, I don't know, so situation is a little bit difficult, you know, because of the too many technology, you know.
Technology.
So that way is really not much sometimes spend time with parents. So a little bit harder. So, and also, if you can, you know, so more spend together. And
spend more time together.
And then, like, whatever conversation or suggestions or whatever need to do things, I think have to say maybe again. This is really. So we sometimes we think, okay, I said that you did not listening, you know, but not really. Looks like listening or not listening. But I think telling just more again and again. So that may help, you know, even though they immediately not help, but the future, you know, or maybe they can really realize maybe 2-3 years later, they can benefit. So
it sounds like I got it completely wrong, so please disregard what I said. I guess he was saying sometimes the tendency to be wrathful, right? But it's actually better to be gentle and loving. Gentle and loving. Gentle and loving.
Right. So these days, I think particularly, you know, so also this kind of changing, you know. So the way I grow up, you know. So also, I don't know, maybe the America, maybe, I don't know, maybe 100 years ago or something, I don't know. So because everything's rely on these parents, you know. So that time is a work, something punishment, hard, you know. They can work because everything rely on these parents. So this better, you know. But these days, you know, I think I think it's more gentle is better than. But even though, you know, there's kind of you can make rules, you know, that's good, but this.
Yeah. So it's better not to be too harsh.
Mm.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Drupan?
Mm.
Hi, this is Curtis. You can't see me. I'm sort of here. When you try to be gentle, speak the truth kindly, and the person is still, you know, harsh to you, sometimes I think it's necessary to withdraw, to pull back so that you are not mistreated.
Right. So yes, so Terwa, yina tate kadu len jago grace lavina. Tine chora control malakan len jago grace.
Yes, so that can be the case at times, but the important thing is to not respond with anger still, even in withdrawing, to make sure that you don't respond with anger.
Mm.
Thank you.
So there's a question from Facebook from Lobsam Dorje, and he says, you hold our minds in your heart, and this is a heavy burden. We appreciate you, Drupan. And my question is, what is the difference between renunciation and aversion to suffering?
So Ninjung Dang the Dungala Dangwa Cheya Ichapargare Yore.
Dungala tangwachia.
Yore the Gana Dangwa the Dungal the Go Sambali Rewa the Dangwa Dunga Rang Dangwa Che Dang Ninjung Gichapargare Yore.
Ta chetati nyela imba tangi konshua na yide chi. Ngaso dungala dangwa ya da yo mari tangi la imba. Yine yang ko dunga ha ko grace cho. Dungi ha ko na. Tine ngaso dungi tela tundu semji tine ko ninjung le ong wa. Yine da ti karsan ko Quran related wa. Yine yang ko ji so ngaso dungi ha ko gore sina dungi la ji dobore sambe ke lo ti sinayo yes.
So it isn't that we have aversion, you know, it's not, as he said before, you know, we don't, it's not so skillful to have aversion towards suffering or push suffering away. But it is important to understand suffering, to acknowledge and to really see it. And then based on that acknowledgement and understanding of suffering, then there really arises the wish to tame your own mind. And that desire to tame your own mind is renunciation, or the word minjung in Tibetan, which is actually not perfectly translated as renunciation, but that's what we translate it as. And so it's actually related. It is related in that you do recognize the suffering and you acknowledge the suffering, and that turns you toward renunciation, but you're not sort of holding on to a concept of suffering being bad. You're not thinking, oh, the suffering is bad.
Tini da dunga yuwa de ha ko ne tini ji ngaso dungar tabya tabhi zunju zumya rawa wada tini de tali ngaso ketanda tiri lo chus lo wa ta chu lam lo wa sia de ta ngaso chu nyam ne chi ya wa dungi ha bana cha sha na sani jumne ne dungar she par cha so tini dungar she ne tini ta ngoni tini kunjong lo re a gni tini
So in understanding that there is suffering, then with the mind of renunciation, then we apply diligence in the methods that we know lead to freedom. And so this is why actually the first line of the 4 Dharmas of Gampopa, where it says, grant that my mind may turn toward the Dharma, or may my mind turn toward the Dharma, is actually together with the truth of suffering, because it is actually in recognizing the first noble truth, the truth of suffering, that causes the mind to turn toward the Dharma. And then once the mind has turned toward the Dharma, then may the Dharma progress along the path. And so that corresponds actually with the truth of cessation, the origination of suffering, and therefore in understanding the origination of suffering, then we apply the appropriate methods, or the actual methods that put an end to suffering, that actually cause us to or enable us to overcome suffering, or bring an end to the suffering through understanding the origination.
So that were all those were all the questions that were on the chat and on Facebook. So if anyone else has a question live.
Thank you.
Hi, Trungpan. My question is, how do you let go of expectation without reducing motivation?
다 기타 레와 텔라 고 니니로 지 용구도와 다고 지 레와 텔라 양고 지 positive 레와로 지 다 negative 레와로 니 용구도와 베네 다고 negative 레와로 지 이나 베네 차샤노 다 나베 지 나베 민체 부부도 나베 지 나라라 지 북섬 타야로 지게 negative 로이나 고지 지 파야케 다 가시 용으로 당야케 타기 지기로와 얘네 양고 레와 카히케 가시는 것을 팬토고요. Then the Omniac, Simjan, Pentoyak, Rewa, Maran Sandiak, Rewa, Mara Yabunga, Rewa, Maran Bechunia Nanchiak, Rewa. What is a Rewa? This one degrees. He's Rewa Telecani, Umatolian, Chunia Nanchia, Pentoku, what you Gemin Rewa Yankini, Turtle Day, Jetan, Maritina Yangato. 남녀는 지인이 가나 우리 와서 행위요레스 제가 나 이단 가서 뺀도 저 particular 가서 planning 리 goal planning 로 지 요레 개인게 대양의 planning 레와 차네 거
So actually, it's important to recognize that actually there are sort of two categories of expectation. There's wholesome expectation and unwholesome expectation, or positive and negative expectation. So what is considered negative or unwholesome expectation, those are the expectations that are fueled by self-grasping. So like, I need to become someone important, I need a big name, or I want, you know, or whatever, power or whatever. If you're thinking of yourself, mainly it's sort of like gaining and centered around the worldly concerns and how they affect oneself, then this is an unwholesome expectation. So that needs to be identified. And then, but when it comes to wholesome expectations or hopes, then those are actually positive. You know, they're actually what fuel our Dharma practice. So, you know, having the hope, you know, to be able to benefit beings, having the hope to reach awakening, having the hope to improve, you know, as human beings, or to progress on the path, having the hope to really dedicate, you know, be disciplined in Dharma practice, and really, you know, to really practice. So these are all positive expectations, or wholesome expectations that help us stay sort of in line, on track with our Dharma practice. So it's actually skillful to have those kinds of hopes and expectations, and in the relative sense. So it's beneficial from the, you know, in the relative sense. Of course, ultimately, then all hope and fear, all expectation and doubt are released or overcome, but temporarily speaking on the path, there is a difference between positive and negative expectations. And so we want to increase the positively motivated expectation and hope, and decrease the negative. And so also planning, it is necessary, of course, to plan. You know, we have to do a lot of planning, especially here in the West, and planning itself is expectation. It's actually a form of hope or expectation, and we need to plan. If we don't plan, then things don't happen. So it's also, to some extent, we do engage, we just have expectations. Anyway.
Good question. Okay, if there's no question, so then we going to dedication. So I think maybe we can do today like the money dedication.
Okay. Maybe today bouquet chegos.
You can do that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So we can do the money dedication in Tibetan for all the people who have died. So if you have the prayer book, and there's the green divider here in the prayer book, and it says money dedication. So if you go to the green divider, then it begins there.
So everybody have tags, or maybe we can a couple of minutes.
would we get a copy of the prayer book?
So it actually, if you go on our webpage to the virtual Dharma site, there's a section in the middle of the page that says opening and closing prayers, and you'll see the Mani dedication in there. It's a digital file. I can, what I'll do is I'll post it in the chat so everybody has quick access to it. And it is on page, it's in the, towards the back of the book.
Thank
Page
you.
43, yeah, sure thing. Okay, there you go. So it's in the chat now.
So, okay, so page 1. Des ondes des rois, je vois, je digue, dodo, sendigue, la direse, ananga, dawe, jabe, je, se, je, wo, pa, me, la, jansa, lo. Mani, be, me, won, je, ba, nye, me, ton, wa, je, do, jawa, janzo, se, dan, je. Ada je la ma na je jo je de nin bo ye ge zhong men yu ma shuo. O ma ne be me wo je ye be san je non je gong zuo tang mo san je non je zu zuo tang. Da da xiu ba nan je xia zhen de nin bo ye ge zhong men yu ma shuo. O mani be me hong she, ye jian zhi re pa ma lo gong tang, nian zhi dun zhuo shi xian du ba na, wang gong bo jing re se jian lang na zhong, de wa jian de jie wa jin jie la. No mani be me hong she, de la de ne zhang dang mo song jie, ne du le ge zhen de 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 na, ang gong bo jin re se jian long na zhong, de wa jian de jie wa jin jie la. O mani be me hong she, ni ji xun bi jian da chen qian tang, ma ji song bi jian da pong ma na, ang gong bo jin ren se jian lang na zhong, de wa jian de jie wa jin jie la. O mani be me hong she, po song tu tian la ma yin du bo, tu lu di si dian bi sen jian na, ang gong bo jin ren se jian lang na zhong, de wa jian de jie wa jin jie la. O mani be me hong she, Pi zhu jiang long bang tai mi nian qi, ti mi yu zhe nian san chang hua na, ang gong bo jin ren se jian lang na zhong, de wa jian de jie wa jin jie la. O mani be me hong she, mi ge zhe dang zai mi na bo tang, de dang nian na ju bi ling nian na, ang gong bo jin ren se jian lang na zhong, de wa jian de jie wa jin jie la. No mani be me hong she, ngo ye jiang mo la na qin ba tang, 心不自浪别成颠脑，公婆见人世间浪闹中，对我见个结我情见了，玛尼贝美吽是。希望那位图腾没开通，这根高级前的马勒巴，公婆见人世间浪闹中，对我见个结我情结了。玛尼贝美吽是这些不些拉罗求罗索，也给你对面发动将巴南，公婆见人世间浪闹中，对我见个结我情结了。玛尼贝美吽是。我用同别马的真见他，小茶苏别生见马勒巴，公婆见人世间浪闹中，对我见对见我来见见了。玛尼贝美吽是，没查看的熊巴熊心，门中那波木索木巴那。公婆见人世间浪闹中，对我见个结我情结了。玛尼贝美吽是，不藏康松那里藏贝人，灵觉你我那。公婆见人世间浪闹中，对我见个结我情结。玛尼贝美吽是，牛马前波阿拉尼杰的苏切苏米扎拉森见那，公婆见人世间浪闹中，对我见个结我情结。玛尼贝美吽是。鸟儿也大土多拉玛通，拉美拉松康松圣洁闹，公婆见人世间浪闹中，对我见个结我情结了。玛尼贝美吽是，求取心康让将大灵。地心灵巴达维圣洁闹，公婆见人世间浪闹中，对我见个结我情结。
So then we'll do the short dedication on page 24. By the virtues collected in the three times by myself and all beings and samsara and nirvana, and by the innate root of virtue, may I and all beings quickly attain unsurpassed, perfect, complete, precious enlightenment. May the teachings of the great Gongpa Ratna Shri, who is omniscient, Lord of the Dharma, Master of interdependence, continue and increase through study, practice, contemplation, and meditation until the end of samsara.